I'm Alex Weathersby, and these are my top 5 LGBT web series that I have watched so far. LGBT representation is a really important part of being critical of media, and the representation we get is usually skewed very heavily towards white people, towards gay and lesbians, specifically towards gay men, and to very specific kinds of relationships. Web series, I think, are a really important part of turning around this representation, being more inclusive, being more intersectional. So I'm really excited to share which web series I think have done a really good job of this, and hopefully I watch many more and can do more videos like this. The first web series I think has done a fantastic job in terms of LGBT representation among other kinds of representation is The Adventures of Jamie Watson and Sherlock Holmes. This is a series based obviously off the Sherlock Holmes novels. The first season is vlog style and the second season is TV style. There's all different kinds of LGBT identities represented. The Watson character, Jamie, is bisexual. The Sherlock Holmes character is aromantic and asexual. Stanley from the second season is trans. Stanley is also demisexual and panromantic. There is a gay male character, Mary Morstan's a lesbian, and Wendy Hooper is pansexual. So there's a ton of different sexualities represented. All the character personalities are diverse as well. So you're not just getting the same copycat character of there's a femme lesbian, there's a femme lesbian, there's a femme lesbian, there's a effeminate gay man, there's another effeminate gay man. LGBT people can look, act, be anything. Another thing that Tajwash does really, really well that a lot of other web series tend to skip is the inclusion of people who are disabled and mentally ill with their representation. Irene Adler, who is asexual aromantic in this series, also uses a cane to get around, so she has some sort of limited physical mobility. And then Jamie, the Watson character, who is bisexual, also suffers from depression. And these things play a part in how they respond to situations. It plays a part in who they are, but much like their sexuality, it's not portrayed as being tokenized in any way. And I think that that's just a really important addition in this web series that I don't maybe see everywhere else. The characters are also not represented purely by their sexualities. You can't simply say Sherlock is the ace character. You couldn't simply say Wendy's the pan character. They all have very specific character traits that are not intrinsically tied to their sexualities. What I also like about this series is that I personally don't like coming out stories because I feel coming out stories very often are presented for straight people to watch as opposed to for people in the queer community to watch and see themselves represented. I feel like it's often used as more of a teaching moment than a representational moment. While there are moments where they explain their sexualities to each other, this was capable of being very diverse without making it be a very special episode. The second series that is possibly one of the best women who love women representation series I've ever seen is Sidetrack. This series does a great job of intersecting different races and religions and experiences. The cast is made up entirely of queer women and one non-binary person. There's a bisexual woman who is also Asian, and she deals with a lot of people fetishizing her for her race as well as her sexuality. There is a Muslim queer woman who they show her praying and getting up early in the morning to do the 5 prayers a day. Some of them are looking for romantic relationships. Some of them aren't really looking for anything monogamous. There's a pair who have been in a relationship for a really long time, but are having a lot of difficulties. And there's one who's looking for true love. So there's just also a really diverse range of experiences and how they all experience their sexuality, and I think that's super important because usually the same story gets told over and over on TV. A woman who assumed she was straight until she met that one special girl who's also usually very, very feminine. There's usually very, very white, assumed to be Christian, and if they're not Christian, then there's no religion portrayed at all. I just think that it does a really great job of representing, again, that LGBT people, specifically queer women, can be anything, look like anything, do anything, and it's a really great series. I loved it a lot. Another web series that I watched that I loved was Her Story. This was created by a trans woman and a queer woman. The series has a lot of representation in terms of there's two trans women who actually talk to each other about being trans. There's not just the token trans woman. There's a lot of differences in their experience because one can pass and one cannot pass as easily as being cis. One is white and one is black. One is bisexual and one is straight. And they talk about issues that they face and maybe that they face differently. And that's awesome and amazing to watch because so often you just have the one trans character who's only there to educate all the cis characters. And here it's possible to see you can be trans and have a completely different experience than someone else who is trans, and yet that friendship and that support. There's also a lot of issues that trans people face, specifically from queer women. Characters discuss police violence towards them, being in abusive relationships. Something that a lot of trans women face in abusive relationships is the idea that you're not a real woman. You should stay with the abusive person even if it's bad because that's the best you're going to get, which is so hurtful and so untrue. And then being forcefully outed by people and not being allowed access into places like shelters and not being allowed access to safe spaces. And those are all super important issues, and the series covers them without going into torture porn, without making the characters super miserable and causing them inescapable pain just to prove a point or just to be entertaining. I love this series so much. It's beautiful, it's sweet, it's romantic, it's a really, really good series. I'm so glad I watched it. Another series that was probably the first queer web series that I watched, so it's very close to my heart, is Carmilla. Carmilla is a supernatural series based off the Sheridan Le Faux novel. It takes something that in its time was very lesbophobic and was meant to portray lesbian relationships as leading only to death and despair and being predatory, and it turns it into a love story. Carmilla is not a coming out story. There are 3 lesbians in the main cast. There's a non-binary character. There is a character who's a man who falls for the non-binary character, so they're obviously not straight to some degree. Nobody feels the need to come out. It's in a world, I guess, where not only are there vampires and other supernatural beings, but nobody feels the need to explain their sexuality. And it's just a nice atmosphere of characters are shown crushing on each other and wondering what they are and how they count. And there's a lot of romantic fuzzy moments that lesbians don't often get. A lot of lesbians find their sexualities to be portrayed either as very, very, very sexual or very childlike. So it's just nice to see lesbians represented as having very cute, typical romantic cliche moments. The series definitely does have some issues, especially in terms of its non-binary representation. LaFontaine is given very little time to explain their experience. Not something I can really speak to very well because I'm not non-binary. There's a lot of issues in terms of race and representation. Pretty much all the lesbians on the show are white and very young. The final web series that I want to talk to you about is Couple-ish. This is a web series that takes a very rom-com-y trope. We have to get married so you don't get deported, and applies it to a queer couple. Pretty much the entire cast is queer. The main character, Dee, is non-binary and bisexual, played by a non-binary person, the same person who plays LaFontaine in Carmilla. Rachel is queer. Dee's sister, Amy, is pansexual and also a person of color. And Dee's special friend Edmund is obviously not heterosexual. Since he is with Dee, who is non-binary. There's NB Deal, where Dee comes out to Ed and explains their gender. And Meet the Warsons, which is a really painful but really beautifully acted and really wonderful episode about what it's like to have people who do and people who don't support you for who you are. I think it's wonderful because it really does push that idea. If there are people there who can support you and people who love you for who you are, you should never have to apologize for the people who choose not to support you and who choose to make their love for you conditional. This series did a really good job of kind of doing a coming out story without it seeming like a special episode, without it seeming like it was a teaching moment for non-cis people. I could easily see non-binary people watching the series and not feeling like they're being talked at or that they weren't the intended audience. And I love that Dee, Rachel, and Amy and Ed are all very complex characters. They have a lot of secrets, they have a lot of flaws. So they're clearly so much more than just there to be the token whatever. And it's just a wonderful series in that respect. Again, LGBT people can look, be, behave in so many different ways, and this series doesn't shy away from that. I'll put links to all these series in the text box. I would love to do another video like this again, so if you have any recommendations for LGBT web series, or you want me to do another video talking about more that maybe weren't my favorite but I still really enjoyed, then just let me know.